So if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Pooja Agarwal. I use she, her pronouns. I am a cognitive scientist. I've been doing research on how students learn for 20 years, and I'm a teacher. I started my career as an elementary ed teacher, taught elementary ed, middle school, high school, and I've been teaching college students for about 12 years. So I've been doing research for 20 years, teaching for 20 years, and I am so grateful you're here. We're going to keep this very informal and fast paced. So to introduce the other scientists here in alphabetical order, we've got Dr. Janell Blunt from Anderson University. Dr. Blunt and I were just looking through our emails, tracking back to like literally the first email we had sent each other, and it was 10 and a half years ago, January of 2016. So Dr. Blunt, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, I started off as a college student majoring in engineering and quickly realized that you could apply the same rigor to in the scientific method of understanding how to build a bridge to how to learn. And I have not looked back since. So I am an educator like almost all of you are. I'm in the classroom 4 days a week, and I am thrilled to be here to see what kind of questions you have.
Thanks, Dr. Blatt. Next up, we've got Dr. Veronica Yan from UT Austin. Dr. Yan and I have shared many a text and email and in person and like all of the geeky research things and all of our teacher things. So, Dr. Yan, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am also surprised a cognitive scientist. I'm in an educational psychology department, and so I actually work with a lot of pre-service teachers. I love spending my time thinking about how do we apply cognitive science to real practical teaching problems that we all face.
Thanks. And we've got Dr. Michelle Rivers joining us here too. Dr. Rivers and I mean, all of us like go way back. So, Dr. Rivers, tell us about yourself too.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Michelle Rivers. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, and I'm currently an assistant professor, so just starting my career in academia at Santa Clara University in the Bay Area. But before that, I was in Ohio and Texas, and I started my teaching career teaching piano to children and teaching hands-on science to elementary school students. And before that, I was drawing on whiteboards as a kid. So always been educating in some form or another. And now my research is also on student learning as a cognitive psychologist.
Thanks, Dr. Rivers. Again, if you're just now joining us, this is the QR code you can scan to ask us anything. Add your questions to the Slido, and we're going to be going through them. Some rapid fire, some nuance, lots of teaching tips as well. And I want to share, I'm so stoked. The four of us are all in person together. So I'm going to awkwardly show that we are all sitting in the same room with awkward blurred backgrounds. And let's see, Dr. Blunt, there we go. So we are all here in person, but on our own screens so you can see each of us. So we've got this, I don't know, like this extra energy for being here. So let's start with our questions. This is what Slido looks like, again, that I use with my students and I use in professional development. And you can continue scanning that QR code or going to the website slido.com, #retrieve. And I'm going to kind of full screen highlight while you can also continue upvoting questions. Ooh, so we get to the ones most pertinent for you. So the first up, when is interleaving more or less useful? How do I know how to interleave for my classes? We have an expert, like literally the world's expert on interleaving, Dr. Veronica Yan. So Dr. Yan, tell us more.
Yes, I'll take that question. So we can think about interleaving as having two different types of benefits. One is at the very beginning, what is it drawing students' attention to? So if you think about the concepts in your courses that are most tricky or people get most confused, maybe they look really similar on the surface, or it's the type of thing where you have these problems that they often get confused. When do I use A? When do I use B? That's the first place where interleaving is really helpful by really helping drive people's attention to knowing when they do one thing versus when they do another. So interleaving is really, really helpful with the things that people tend to get confused, with things that are most challenging. The second part of interleaving is that it includes space retrieval practice. Just by virtue of mixing things up, you're having to constantly retrieve and reload. And so eventually, as people become more practiced up when they're moving beyond just initial attention, think about incorporating interleaving through cumulative frequent retrieval practice as a way just to help people constantly practice that retrieve reload.
So would you say it's like once you've got it, start mixing it up?
Yeah, so when you're teaching things from the very beginning, there are some things that might be better blocked because maybe the concept itself is really hard for people to kind of just sit with and understand all the different parts. But if you know you have things that are really confusable, you can start with interleaving those pretty early on. But then once they're past the initial teaching, interleave everything. Space practice.
Can you give us another example of how to do it? Like pick a content area or subject area or your own class.
So let's see. One of the examples I talked with this teacher once, they were like speech pathology, speech therapy, and they're like, we teach all these different things with these different types of clinical different types of strategies or methods you would use for people having different types of disorders. And I said, well, do you ever interleave those? Because there's a lot of similar strategies across the different diagnoses, but they tend to go diagnosis by diagnosis. And it actually makes it so it's harder to understand, like, why is there something in common as to why you would use a particular strategy. Math is another great one where you'd want to interleave because a lot of times those equations, those shapes, those basic problems look really similar on the surface, and they can memorize as many formulae as they want, but when it comes to the final exam, they have trouble figuring out, oh, which of these things that I've memorized is applicable here. Same thing for science concepts. When do you know when one of the concepts you've learned is relevant to a particular applied scenario versus another? Having that interleave practice really helps you with understanding how to apply the knowledge that you've learned to the real world because the world actually comes at you interleaved. The world comes at you interleaved, our exams are interleaved, and so we really want to make sure students are practicing that selection, their pattern recognition, the problem identification stage.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Next one. How do we get student buy-in, reducing resistance, motivation? What if retrieval's ungraded? And we're going to make awkward eye contact just because we're, again, sitting right here at the same table. Who would like to answer this question about student motivation?
I would love to hear the things that Dr. Rivers and Dr. Blunt do in their classrooms.
Yes. Dr. Blunt.
Okay. All right. So I think we've got to make, I love retrieval practice. It's one of the easiest changes that you can make in your classroom. And all it takes is just saying, let's retrieve something, piece of paper, whiteboard, whatever you have. And I found that when students realize that the work they're doing matters, they're going to get a lot of buy-in. So when you model the technique for them and you do it in class, the students are going to do it because they're in class doing it together, and they're going to see that it pays off. And once they see that it is improving their learning, they get a lot more buy-in and they're engaged. Like students, I really believe they want to be engaged. They just don't know how. So by having something, I'll show you what I do because never go anywhere without your whiteboard. So I have mini whiteboards, a suitcase I wheel into the classroom, and it sets the expectation that you matter and you are going to be involved in the classroom. And that gives so much buy-in because they know that I see them, I see what they're doing, and that mistakes are okay. This isn't an exam, it's practice, it's retrieval practice. And that has really made a difference, having that individual to draw from our social psych literature. It takes away from what we call the diffusion of responsibility. If I ask a question to the class, that one kid answers, you know what I mean? And then no one else does. But this gives everybody the chance to participate and they just get used to it.
Can I also say the other thing I love about the whiteboards is that it is ungraded and it is something that you erase. I think that's one of the big things is that it's if we separate out the activity from any kind of grading component or very low stakes, but you have the social norms of having to engage in it anyways, that takes a lot of that initial fear or the perceived cost of it out.
Yeah, so to jump on that, I would add that I often use multiple choice questions and you can just throw them on the board the way that Dr. Agarwal is now and have students answer on their fingers. I love a good finger exercise because it's so inclusive. Everybody has a hand, so they can hold up something and then maybe they answer A or B or C or D, and then find someone next to them who has a different hand up, go talk to that person, try to convince them. And often that can increase that sense of belonging because everyone's talking to each other too.
Thanks. And again, feel free to add to the QR code slido.com #retrieve. We're going through these quickly. So feel free if there are follow-up questions or you want us to elaborate to add those to the Slido. Next up, what are some of the most common mistakes or misconceptions in applying these strategies? I can share a little bit what I found, and it's not quite a mistake, and it's a very understandable concern, is that with using retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, metacognition, feedback, it can seem really overwhelming. And it can seem like, oh my gosh, I have to replan or I have to prep extra. And so a common misconception, a mistake of sorts, is that this is going to take a lot of time, both classroom time and prep time, and it doesn't have to. You can have whiteboards, but if you don't have whiteboards, again, Dr. Rivers said you can hold up a finger if you don't have those, or you want a tech tool, there are tech tools. But I really love index cards. Many of you have heard me talk about the simplicity of index cards is handing them out to students. They write down one or two things that they've learned or something they remember from a previous lesson. You can collect them, they can swap them, you can shuffle them, and that takes literally no preparation. You don't have to add something to your PowerPoint slide or Google slide. You can just jump right in with a little retrieval practice. So I would say, go for it. A common misconception or concern is the amount of time, and it doesn't have to take time at all. Dr. Rivers. Oh.
I would add that another misconception that a lot of students have when it comes to interleaving, spacing, or retrieval practice is they have to already know the material before they can start engaging in these strategies. So they think, I will test myself, but I'm going to test myself right before the big exam to see if I'm ready. And so I would say, nope, you should be retrieving early and often. We know that even retrieving information before you've even learned, as long as you get corrective feedback afterwards, is going to help you remember that material better because you're connecting to prior knowledge, you're activating those brain networks, right, and getting people more engaged and curious about what they're going to learn. So start with these strategies earlier than you think you should and do them more often than you think you should.
Yeah.
And make them low stakes. We're not saying do more testing, standardized testing, exams, anything that is using retrieval recall from memory. That's what we're talking about. We're not saying you need to add more graded quizzes.
Dr. Yan, what are your thoughts? Common mistakes or misconceptions?
I think a lot of times the students don't realize that they have the power to do it for themselves rather than waiting for the teachers to provide the resources. Um, and and so I think one of the biggest things that I really want to do in my teaching is try to give students this like self-regulated um, empowerment, because I think they really think like it can only be if my teacher provides it. If my teachers don't provide me practice questions, then I'm SOL. I just can't do anything myself. So I spend a lot of time trying to not only model in class for my students how you could engage retrieval practice on your own, but also talking about what this looks like translated to their own time in their own ways for their other classes.
Thanks. I love that question. And I see we only have 6 on the Slido, so please feel free to keep adding them. Otherwise, we can expand on all of these things for longer. You recently said the Ebbinghaus curve is not entirely reliable. What might we use instead? Thank you for this question during the Zoom registration. So my most recent Zoom parties, I talked about how forgetting is normal. This may or may not be my next book. I'm playing around with some ideas. If you've heard of the Ebbinghaus curve, you've maybe seen this graph with like this big kind of drop off thing. And we know from personal experience, each of us have experienced learning something and then forgetting something. So this Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is literally just you learn stuff and you forget it. Yeah, I saw one of you go like that. And so Erman Ebbinghaus is the one who published data on this forgetting curve in 1886. I will say his sample size was 1, which was himself. and the materials were made up words, literally nonsense syllables. And so in the previous Zoom parties, I'd shared how the forgetting curve isn't accurate and it can actually be misleading. So to the great question of what should we do instead, I would love the weigh in from my colleagues here. To me, it really depends on like what is the intention of using the forgetting curve. I think some of it is, of course, to highlight like just how rapid forgetting happens. I think some of it is to help add some weight that there is more than 100 years of research on learning and forgetting. But I also worry about people just throwing up fancy graphs to look fancy. And so I always say you don't need graphs or curves or fancy names or sample sizes of one or research at all. I love talking about my own forgetting. It takes me time to think about what I did last weekend. Like that's forgetting, and that happens all the time. And we forget students' names and we forget where we put our cell phones. So I think to me, forgetting examples actually serve a much richer purpose for teachers and educators, for our students, for our family friends, than this outdated graph that isn't entirely realistic or representative of actual forgetting. Colleagues, what do you think about the forgetting curve and how you would describe forgetting?
I can go. So I think the general shape of it is something that still stands. But I think but anytime someone tries to put a number on things, then you know it's completely made up. If someone tries to say, oh, you forget 90% of what you read within a day and you remember, or you forget only 30% of what you do in one day, all of those numbers are completely fabricated, made up. Don't trust it when they do that. I think, what still stands is that forgetting is normal. And also, there are things that we can do to change the shape of that curve, to change how quickly we forget versus, or make it so that we hold on to things for longer. And those are effective practices like spacing and retrieval and getting people to process things at a deeper level. We know that those things do slow forgetting. So I still think it's useful in that sense, but just don't put any numbers on it.
Dr. Blunt.
I just think that there's a lot of factors that affect forgetting, and so I would hate for us as educators to have given a really good classroom lesson that day, done a lot of retrieval, interleaving, and then walk away feeling like, oh, this is futile. Because if you're really giving your lessons like all the science of learning, your forgetting curve is not going to look like that. Things like retrieval practice can protect against forgetting, and interleaving can protect against forgetting. And so by having this, sample size of 1886 graph kind of be like your like what you feel like you're limited to is a little limiting and discouraging.
And Dr. Rivers?
I guess we were just talking about this idea of collective memory earlier as a team. And something that I notice is that although there might be one student in my class who can't remember much except maybe one thing we talked about last week, I'll often do retrieval prompts that are very broad, like tell me one video you remember we watched last week or one concept we discussed. And collectively, they remember pretty much everything, but one student might not remember everything. So that might be a way. The forgetting curve is different for everyone, like what is being forgotten, what is being held on to, depending on what resonates, what prior knowledge they have, what they're retrieving, right? So that's another way to kind of strengthen those memories is rely on the whole class. You have a wealth of knowledge in the room. They're not blank slates. We know that, right? So, yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to take a moment to normalize forgetting. I'm noticing many of you may be taking notes. And we could talk about note taking too, but maybe just embrace forgetting. Like, don't take notes right now, right? We'll build in and model some retrieval practice to improve your own long-term learning from our time together on Zoom. This is being recorded. It'll be posted on YouTube and shared. So just try to not take notes and just be along with us for the ride. How's that sound? Good. Uncomfortable, but good. So thanks for asking. It's my new favorite topic to talk about is forgetting in additional learning, of course. Is there such a thing as too much retrieval or better versus worse ways to do retrieval, types of retrieval, optimal schedules, etc.? Colleagues who would like to start?
Oh, yeah, okay. So, a worse way to do retrieval is going to be making it too much of a risk. And this could be, again, like I said, like too high stakes, like you don't get this right, your grade's going to suffer. Sometimes it's worth paying attention to some games that include retrieval. It can be a great way to use retrieval, and it's worth paying attention, like, are we creating anxiety by having this like fast-paced retrieval? Because the reality with retrieval is that it does take some time. It When you are retrieving something, it is effortful, and effort isn't going to be instantaneous. So when you're retrieving, you might have this like, got it, or it might be like that pause for like a minute until someone retrieves something. So too much pressure, time constraints, so those are all things to watch out for.
Dr. Yan, Dr. Rivers?
So this question came from the registration form, and one of the versions of this question was, if I do it every day, or if I do it every week, is that too much? Again, if you can give a little bit of time, like 5 minute quick thing, I think it absolutely can be a daily practice, a daily routine. We know that people do forget from one day to the next or within a few hours. So I think that it actually is really useful to have that built in very frequently. But again, as low stakes or disguised as a game.
Yeah, I think a lot of students are afraid of those like high stakes midterms, but they love trivia and they love Jeopardy, and they're always asking me for more cahoots in the class. So I'm like, that's retrieval. So anyway, you can make it fun. As far as schedule, I like I said before, early and often. So I tell them to kind of normalize that forgetting process that we're going to do retrieval every day, and you're going to get used to just having to put something down. And if you can't think of anything, here is like one cue word. What can you think of related to the word retrieval? I don't know. Anything to kind of get them started. And then they can talk to each other. You can always give little scaffolds if you see everyone sitting there with absolutely blank stares, can't write anything down. Maybe give them a hint, and that's still going to be better than not doing it at all.
I love these tips.
I want to add a little thing about the frequent retrieval because I've and this also ties into like potential misconceptions or mistakes. Sometimes I see people only giving a quiz on the content from the previous lesson. And then that means you do get retrieval, but you only get the one. What you really want to make sure is people have repeated retrieval practice over every single one of those important concepts, that they're constantly having to come back to it. And so do think about having those cumulative practice where maybe you do load it more heavily on the more recent things, but make sure that a week later, a month later, 2 months later, you're still bringing back concepts from earlier in the semester. We have a question in the comments, why low stakes practice? Why is that more efficient? So it's not necessarily about efficiency, but it's about student anxiety, student buy-in, because it's the retrieval, the cognitive practice of retrieving from memory that's important. It's less important if grades are attached to it. Having grades attached to something can be one of the ways that we somehow incentivize people to actually try, but it leads to a bunch of other potentially unwanted side effects as well. So potentially having people start just Googling the answer because they're really afraid of being wrong. Suddenly you're turning off the cognitive process. So if we can find people in low stakes or no stakes way to engage in retrieval, that's where the real benefit is.
And I have graded quizzes every week, so that's retrieval practice, which is both assessment and formation. So it's not that any kind of evaluation is wrong or terrible, and it's more about this, like it kind of tying to that earlier question about buy-in. How are we going to get buy-in?
And if we want to talk about like using your brains, trying to retrieve from memory, that's going to be the way to really build your learning. We can't be penalizing people heavily people heavily when we know this is still early on the learning process. We can't penalize them for engaging in learning the way we want them to engage.
I would also add we shouldn't penalize people for forgetting. And that's where I think some of the low stakes is really helpful rather than being like, oh my gosh, you only got 60% on a high stakes exam. I also have weekly retrieval practice, these like mini quizzes, and mine are only 2% of students' grades each week, and I drop the lowest few. And it really disincentivizes students from using AI. I don't talk much about AI. I'm going to write about my thoughts in my newsletter. But it's actually easier for them to just type in a few sentences into my Google Forms than like copying and pasting some of the prompts because they know they're allowed to forget. And so I tell my students if they forget a few questions, like what's a concept you remember about developmental psychology? And they can write in, I forgot. I really tried to retrieve, but I forgot. And I just trust that. And they can still get full points even if they're forgetting a little bit along the way because that's part of the point.
I think one challenge with this, though, is if we're doing more retrieval activities or more engaging activities, is that might mean that we need to lecture less. And we might have been raised thinking that lecture is king and that it's the easiest thing to do. I mean, we all know how to lecture. And so that could be a challenge, is sometimes you have to open things up to see what students provide, right? If you're having them do retrieval, they might say things that are totally out there, and you're like, where did you get that from? That's not what we went over in class, right? So you have to give up a little bit of control, and it also means you may have to cut a little bit of material to make room for these activities. So that can be a challenge if you're in a K-12 environment, especially where you have to stick to specific curricula. But again, these activities can take as little as 1 minute, write down as much as you can remember.
I wanted to mention, I put this in the chat, but I forgot to mention that Dr. Blunt, Dr. Yan, Dr. Rivers are all contributors to our book that's now a year old, Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning. So you can learn more about tips from their own classrooms in addition to their research. Just a tiny bit of research to back it all up. But as many of you said, you love how short the book is. Of course, I can't quite emphasize it on Zoom, but it's very tiny and short. So I hope you'll check that out. And next question. I see we've got 12 now. All right, we're cooking. What would be a fun practice retrieval activity to start the year? For example, to introduce the idea of retrieval and what it is. Can I start by mine?
Yes,
okay, I love mine. I love
it.
So I've written about this. If someone wants to find it on my website and put the link in the chat, I use trivia questions. I use one trivia question. And I use one specific to my school, but it really could be about anything, your state, your city, just some fun fact you like. And in my, at my school, I always start the first day of class, like literally the first slide, maybe the second slide of my first day of class, is I ask students how many seats are in our auditorium. And they all kind of look at each other. So I teach at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. We're not in California. We're like Juilliard, but cooler. So we do contemporary music, like pop, rock, jazz, soul, K-pop, etc. So even though I teach science to musicians, they've all performed in this auditorium, but they've never actually thought about the number of chairs. So it's a really great trivia question that is personally relevant to them. So they get, they chat with the buddy next to them. They don't know each other yet, but they already have a shared experience to talk about. And I kind of go around, ask for estimates. I share the average with class, and then I tell them the answer. It's 1,215. My own retrieval, 1,215. And then halfway through the first class, I'll be like, how many seats are in the auditorium? And then I already have this call and response, 1,215. And then at the end of the first class, I ask it again. And they're like, okay, 1,215. I'm like, great. And then we move on. And maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I ask them the trivia question and they're like, whoa. And then maybe 6 weeks later or 5 weeks later, I ask them the question. And then the very last day of class, I ask them the question, and it's like this drop mic moment. And it's just a way to emphasize like retrieval practice can be part of everyday life. You're gonna remember this fun fact because it's personally relevant to you. And it's just a fun way of kind of anchoring a lot of our discussions about forgetting and learning and retrieval throughout the school year and the semester. So that's my kind of go-to for the start of the year, but also throughout the school year. What are your go-tos, everyone?
I've got to just make a quick comment. Did you guys catch that when she was retrieving that pause? Because retrieval is effortful and we've got to allow space for our students and ourselves to retrieve. It's going to have a little bit of that, oh, got it moment. That was just so good.
What are your other starts to the year? And Dr. Blunt, you've tried the trivia thing.
Oh man, I've done like so many things and I love them all. I've done the trivia thing, that's fun. I've done in my neuroscience class, I'm making a point about consciousness. I've had them write their name backwards with their non-dominant hand. And that's not a retrieval thing, but it does normalize the mistakes and the eraser. Because I'm using the whiteboard so heavily, it's showing us that like we're all gonna make mistakes and it's fine and we all laugh and they also get to know each other's names. I've done things, I just jump in sometimes too. Like I say, all right, like now we're gonna all retrieve this thing that I just said. And then you get a very metacognitive moment where you can say, this is why we're doing retrieval practice. Wow, it's been 5 minutes and we've already forgotten that. And then I bring that question up later within the same class period and you've got almost 100% retrieval. And that is so satisfying for students walking away from day one of class, knowing a study technique, feeling confident about something they learned, and then also at the same time, questioning their memories a little bit. Because when I introduce that concept, they get it, it makes sense, it's fluent, and then 5 minutes later, they've forgotten it. And so often our students don't practice retrieval on their own until they're retrieving on an exam and they're like, I don't understand, like I knew everything and your exam must be bad. But it's just like how they knew the thing 5 minutes ago and then they can't remember it until they practice retrieval. So by modeling that in class, you're really hitting so many things and it's not, and those are all just like class standard business, not even anything like unique or different, but just doing some narrating of why you're doing what you're doing. You can get a lot of buy-in.
And Dr. Blunt, I was thinking in our book, in your chapter, you mentioned name tents. Can you tell us about your name tent activity for retrieval?
Hello,
Yeah.
Oh, good. So yes, I wish I had one with me, but they're just one sheet of paper. On one side, you put people's names and they fold it in like a triangle, so it creates a little pyramid. And inside the name tents, we're on the quarter system, so we can fit all 10 class, I guess 20 class sessions in the back of the name tents. There is an example if someone can find it.
I have your Google Drive link if you want me to share.
Yeah, those in there. And I have them first. I start the class with a question of the day, question du jour, to kind of get us started. So, asking a question to start the class, and sometimes that's as simple as I teach cognitive psychology. So, what is the difference between a computer and a human mind? Right? Just getting them thinking, and then we talk about that. And then at the end of class, I have them answer that same question based on what we learned throughout that lecture or activities that day. Can they answer it again in the name tent? And this year I started calling them souvenirs because they get to take they get their souvenir at the end of class that they get to take with them. And I let them keep the name tents, and it has literally like the main takeaway from every day from the whole class that they get to take. So I was like, that's your final sheet, right? Here's everything we learned in one sheet. And it's also really fun for me to read those over and check their knowledge, give them feedback. I'll leave little smiley face notes or whatever on their name tents too. So it is an interactive activity.
Thanks. How about our next question? What does research say about tools like Albert.io? I'm not familiar with that one. Quizlet, AI generated practice questions, etc. I'm going to throw that out to you all. Thoughts?
Albert.io right now.
Yeah. I'm like bamboozle.
So many AI things that are popping up. And I know the four of us get emails from people about ed tech and ed games incorporating AI like all the time. So there's a lot of new things.
I think the thing is the devil's in the details. The devil's absolutely in the details on what that looks like. So My students, this is pre-AI, but my students love using Quizlet. And I've had students who've come up to me, it's like, oh, you talked about retrieval practice. I use loads of retrieval practice. I use Quizlet all the time. Why do I still do so poorly? And I'll say, well, can you show me your Quizlet cards? And or I've gone online too and looked at what they've created and made public for my class. And they will take bullet points and put the first few words of the bullet point on one side and then the remaining few words of the bullet point on the other side. However, everything in my class is applied. Everything is like, oh, this student is struggling with this. What would you recommend to them? Or like, here's two scenarios. Like, what is the reason why this would be better than the other scenario? Um, there's nothing about memorizing the exact wording of my bullet points that's going to help. So they are doing retrieval practice, but they're not doing it at the right level. They're not practicing retrieving the content in the way that I want them to use it. And so the devil's going to be in the details. What is on those Quizlet cards? And what are the prompts given to AI that actually help deepen beyond just, can I memorize a definition? Can I memorize a specific sentence from the material? So at UT Austin, we've created our own little Claude-based program called Sage Tutor, Sage Tutor, where it has strict instructions not to give answers, but you can seed it with little quick things like I can put information about my class, I can upload my materials, I can upload examples of my assignments and what I want them to learn. Given that information, now that system can generate really useful practice questions for my students. So it's with the caveat, are they now practicing things at the right level of depth? And are there enough parameters put in to make sure we're not repeating misconceptions?
I love, I got two things that come to my mind. One is old school. I love the resource Dr. Agarwal has about flashcards, and the same applies to any tool, right? You can treat a flashcard like a retrieval activity, or you can treat a flashcard like a non-retrieval activity. You can just get all flippy with it and not actually be retrieving, and that is a really effective tool that you can make ineffective. So that's, again, and that's old tech. And I think this question's really getting at, the how do we think about knowledge in an AI world. So I will say, one thing that we were talking about this morning is how I use AI generated practice questions in my classes to the great benefit of the class. There are a lot of really nice things about multiple choice questions. One of them that is not nice is the creation of them. So I have spent some time working with AI to generate just tons and tons of questions that students in my courses use as practice questions. So rather than coming and taking a Canvas quiz that's identical for every student, you get one chance at the end of the week, they have as many chances as they want, but it's going to be pulling from, each week's going to have 100 or 200 questions, and they're going to get 10 randomly sampled. And so along the way, they're getting just a ton of retrieval practice. And this is, at the end of the day, they've got to demonstrate that they've learned something, right? So their highest quiz is their score is what I'm going to keep. And at the same time, they're getting so much retrieval practice. And this is something that I, as an individual, and it would be way too exhausted to have created on my own. So by having AI generate these questions that I can then just go and say, yes, no, okay, I'm going to tweak this, that is an enormous benefit to both my time and the students' learning.
Yeah, I'll add that it's we've talked a lot about retrieval and spacing and interleaving. When we talk about those, we're talking about cognitive processes that underlie those strategies, right? So it's the process of effortful engagement with the mind that is leading to those benefits. So it's not the flashcard that leads to the benefit, right? You can use the flashcard to reread, or you can use it to retrieve. And one thing we haven't touched on as much is this idea of elaboration. So it's not just about retrieving just the fact, but can you elaborate on it? Can you make connections to your own life? Can you come up with examples? Can you explain it in your own words? Things that we want our students to be doing. I'll often add these prompts even to multiple choice questions, right? So getting a little bit more elaboration out of the retrieval so that students are engaging in more effort because they can guess the correct answer. And actually, there is some research on these AI generated tutors that students will try to break them and get them to tell them the answer because they just want to know the answer. So I emphasize to students that it's not just about getting the correct answer, it's about understanding why that's the correct answer and why your misconceptions are wrong, or why there are other things that are not quite right, or why there's more nuance behind the particular process or whatever it is we're talking about. And so I just be careful with some of these AI tools that might offer like a quick solution, but take away that effortful retrieval, spacing, elaboration, these cognitive processes that lead to the benefits.
And in terms of that point, I was thinking, do you all have any specific research as part of the question? Do you know of any research recommended articles about students creating their own retrieval questions? Like pre-AI, I feel like there was a lot of research on the benefits of students creating their own retrieval questions versus teachers. Do you all know much about that research or have a recommendation?
I don't know that I can pull up the name of citation off the top of my head. I have seen
Forgetting's
a lot. Forgetting's normal. I have seen a lot of, yeah, the pre-AI student generated practice questions. If my memory serves correctly, the kind of main takeaway is that students are not good at coming up with their own questions. That instructor generated questions, or the way Janell's done it, where she's asked AI and then she's gone and like double checked every single one to make sure it's right. That tends to be better because students, when they don't know what level of depth they should be looking at or practicing, they end up not coming up with good ones. I want to also just plug multiple choice questions. I feel like we've talked about it, but I don't know that we've talked about it as directly. There's great work from Jerry Little and Elizabeth Bjork that shows that for the purpose of learning, not for assessing students, but for purpose of learning, multiple choice questions can be really great as long as the options are competitive. So it really makes people think more deeply about not just why the correct answer is correct, but why the incorrect one is incorrect. And two, kind of to what Dr. Rivers was saying, getting students to actually do the thinking. In their research, they actually found that in a lot of their experiments, they had to make sure they told students explicitly, don't just try to recognize the correct answer, think about why the wrong ones are wrong. And so different people have also created different versions of multiple choice questions where you might have to actually justify why you didn't select the other options, or where you almost have to think about rating how confident you are, or between two of the options, how confident would you almost like weight? I'm 80% sure it's A, but maybe 20% is B. Just creating some format in the multiple choice question that gets them to think about these other things. And then multiple choice questions are beautiful because it's like a 4-in-1. One question and you can hit a bunch of different concepts.
Thanks. Oh, I love this. I learned so much from my colleagues too. It's so fun. We've got 11 questions and about 45 minutes left if I can do some math. Would love specific strategies that work well in online environments. A lot of the examples have been in person and synchronous so far. Thank you for that important question. Your thoughts, or I can share a bit of my thoughts. Up to you. Okay. I guess I'll start by saying I taught online and asynchronously during the pandemic. I also taught online asynchronous and synchronous at Vanderbilt University for a year, I think. And a lot of these strategies, of course, take a little bit of thinking and maybe a little bit of prep to adapt. But for online, let's say online synchronous, you can still ask students type in what you remember from last class into the chat. Or type it into the chat before getting into breakout groups. That leads to a much more rich conversation than get into a breakout group and talk about what happened last class. So that everyone is engaging in some individual retrieval. I didn't do this, but I heard this tip from an educator where you ask students to run with this example. Think of something you remember from the last class, type it into the chat, but don't hit enter until I say, yeah, puppy, or say, I mean, any word that is ideally not go. Go feels a little anxiety provoking to me. But it's to like type it and then have some kind of keyword where everyone hits enter. So of course, that way everyone's retrieving instead of just looking at one or two people's answers. So that's a great strategy online for synchronous. Dr. Blunt and I were talking about how we use collaborative Google Slides and also Google Docs, where students can share synchronously or asynchronously their thoughts about topics and see each other's thoughts. Asynchronously, I also use Padlet, which is similar to Flip or Flipgrid that has since ceased to exist, but Padlet is great, where students can online asynchronously post like selfie videos with their thoughts and then respond and comment to each other. So of course, discussion boards that you maybe use on your LMS like Canvas or Moodle can also be used for a lot of retrieval practice and really rich discussion. Team, your thoughts? Okay. And again, for all of you, we invite you to put in your thoughts, your tips, your activities, what you do. So even for the person who submitted this question, I would love for you to share in the chat some ways you use retrieval practice online. There's also a brand new book by a colleague of mine, Flower Darby. I think it's called The Joyful Online Teacher or The Joy of Online Teaching. If someone can Google Flower Darby's new book,
Joyful Online Teacher.
Joyful Online Teacher. Great. So you might want to check out that new book. I haven't read it yet, but Flower Darby is like my go-to for online teaching resources and tips. I also recommend the podcast blog, Teaching in Higher Ed. Higher ed and K-12 need to talk a lot to each other, and I wish more of that happened, and I feel very fortunate to do that. So even if you're in K-12, I recommend checking out teachinginhighered.com is maybe the link by Bonnie Stakoviak, because she does a lot of online teaching. She also has a book on online teaching, lots of great tech tools and apps to recommend too. So those are some resources I hope are helpful for online teaching. And again, please feel free to put in any of your recs in the chat. Is there anything really different about students' attention, their attention capacity and ability? Should we change anything about how we structure our courses? We were also talking about that this morning. Again, for anyone who joined late, we are actually here all in person, sitting at the same table, but I swear we're not blurry in real life. So we're talking about this morning. I don't know your thoughts on attention. Okay, Dr. Yan.
Well,
Gosh,
it's not research that I've done myself, but I was just reading about this the other week where people had. So the short answer is no. Nothing has fundamentally changed about our capacity to attend. So in cognitive lab settings, if you were going to administer the classic attention tests, those numbers are still the same. Our capacity has not decreased. However, the thing that has changed is that now we have so many more distractions, more different things in our everyday environments that draw on our attention, that threaten to take away our attention from the task at hand. So it's the environment around us that has shifted, not anything specific to the brains of the students in our classrooms. So we have to then think about understanding that there are a whole lot of extra distractions nowadays compared to back when we were children. What are the things that we might not need to do to structure that in our classes? So I know a lot of different states have now implemented cell phone bans or like smart device bans. Thinking about what are the routines that help students know when we need to focus in and when we predict and get to know like how to regulate our own attention. I think we do have to pay more attention to those things. In my own classroom, I've started to say, if you are going to use your laptop, you are an adult, it is your choice, but knowing that it's going to distract yourself and others, you have to sit in certain places in the classroom. And then other days it will be completely no laptop days because I need them to be actually talking to each other, working together.
Yeah, I like that emphasis on the context and the environment rather than the individual, because there is this idea that like some people have more willpower and they're just like more motivated and better at filtering out distractions is not really true. People are just better at putting themselves in environments that allow them to avoid distractions. and also building those habits. Maybe it's the Pomodoro technique where you commit to single tasking for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. Build up that habit of I'm going to work and I'm going to get that little boost of dopamine, that reinforcement that, oh, I made some progress and now I can continue working. So building in those types of routines into the classroom so that you're modeling for students how to set themselves up for success. Also, Dr. Agarwal mentioned the like video discussion selfies. I've taken advantage of that as well to kind of get them like use the technology that they're already used to. They're used to this like short form video. And so I'm like, okay, we can do short form videos then if that's something that like is more what's the word, more comfortable for you, you're more familiar with it. Awesome. Yeah, do they work?
So Dr. Yan had mentioned that there are many training apps about attention. Dr. Yan, can you elaborate on your thoughts
So
about
I
these?
specifically mentioned this one app by Dr. Alyssa Mrazek, who is a psychologist who works on mindfulness training and attention. And so the app that she's developed teaches about some of that kind of cognitive and psychology behind it. And then she also uses this to collect data, run studies, and it's been promising so far. I can't speak to, whether it has everything, but I know that there's been promising data from that app. One of the big things that I've heard from her is that students actually really like it. It's not that students want to be distracted. As Dr. Rivers was saying, to to claim that this is a willpower, self-control kind of thing really does a disservice to our students. It's really about the environments we place ourselves in. There was a great I think it was like a New York Times article or something. They were interviewing high school students about various technologies and cell phones in the classroom. And one of the students they interviewed said, it's like putting drugs in front of us and then telling us, don't use it, don't take it. Like when you're literally giving it to us, you're now expecting us to somehow like create all the willpower and self-control to resist that temptation. Let's take away that temptation.
Great. Let's see to continue. Oh, sorry, my Slido is acting up a little bit. Let me go back. There we go. Okay, how can I participate in research about learning? I'll just say briefly, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I do have a number of tips about this. If you go to retrievalpractice.org/research, is how to conduct research in your classroom, informally or formally. All of us as teachers and educators are always doing research in our classroom. It may not feel like the academic formal research that me and my colleagues have been doing, but as we were talking about literally today, every time you are changing around the order of your slides or trying out new demos or asking for feedback from students, that is all just experimentation. So I encourage you to think of yourselves as scientists and researchers. We do this as teachers. It's part of the fun of teaching. So if you go to retrievalpractice.org/research, you can see more of my tips. But Dr. Yan, could you tell us a bit more? Because this is a new area that you're talking about.
So as Dr. Agarwal was saying, every time we make adjustments, we are doing informal research, just not as systematically. And I think what was behind this question is someone was perhaps asking, how could I try to do this more systematically? There are many different ways to do it. You could try to do it on your own and then thinking about what are the measures I would do, what are going to be my control, my comparison, how do I be able to draw inferences from my results. There are also people at various universities who I think would be interested. And so a lot of times it might be about reaching out to different people and saying, hey, here's something that I've been trying. I would love to know, is there already work on this, or are there things that I could do, or is there something way we can work together? So I think there's lots of different ways. One of the things I'm going to be working on over the next couple of years is actually I'm I'm getting really serious about trying to help people get involved in the scholarship of teaching and learning. So we're not there yet, but I'm actually thinking, trying to figure out how to develop a series of modules that will help walk teachers through how to think through research questions for themselves, and then walk them through almost like a course, like how do you think about the different types of measures? What are you interested in? How do you think about your control? How do you think about research design? So not available yet. Hopefully will be available over the next year or two.
Can you give us kind of a primer on what does systematic mean?
Oh. So anytime we do make changes, we want to know if that change has actually made a change for the better. And oftentimes we go by just feel, but there's so many differences that happen, right? You don't know if it's just the difference between like one class and the next class, because we've all experienced we can be teaching the exact same class twice in a week, and just by the 8 a.m. students will be completely different from the 10 a.m. students. And so sometimes we don't know if something worked better because it was just something about the students themselves. Oftentimes we're making a bunch of different changes and we don't know what is the thing that worked. And so we oftentimes play around with that. We want to be able to know if we were just to change this one thing, what is the real active piece to it? Um, so it's the systematic is helping us answer those questions and eliminate competing alternative explanations so that we can be more sure that going forward it will continue to work.
Okay, thank you. Let's continue. How do I study when I feel like there is just too much material to cover? This comes up from AP classes, from graduate students, from medical school students. Like, this is a common struggle. So what are your thoughts? Maybe Dr. Blunt, your thoughts. How do you study when there's just so much to study?
I mean, I'm gonna set a timer and I'm gonna Pomodoro that stuff. So if you try to take on everything all at once, it can feel way too overwhelming. But we know from the problem solving literature in an area of psychology that breaking things into small, manageable chunks is how you accomplish the big stuff. So take the big stuff and then break it down. And then on top of that, when you're overwhelmed, thinking about, oh my gosh, I have everything to study. Okay, well, no, you don't. You have 20 minutes or even 15 minutes, and then you're going to get a break. So if you can think about it 15 minutes at a time, that's going to take this big, huge task, be so just so much that you're never even going to start. So if you can break things down, that's going to help a lot.
I love me a to-do list. Shortened. Sometimes the to-do list is open up a Word doc on my computer. Dopamine rush. And little treats. So rewarding yourself for little achievements. Again, trying to build that routine, and then remembering your why. Right? Like, why are you doing this? What's the point of doing this quiz that my teacher made me do? What's the point of learning about this particular concept? How does it tie into the bigger picture of what I'm doing with my life and how it's going to help me, contribute to society or make my loved ones' lives better?
Another thing that I've noticed is that students, so as a professor, I'll think, oh, like these are the general chunks of things, and it's not that much because I can see the connections between them. But for my students, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to like memorize like 200 different things. I definitely got this when I taught statistics. People are like, oh, I have so many formulae I have to memorize. And in fact, if I look at it as a professor, I'll be like, actually, there's just three because like these eight are all the same generalized, like a different form of this more general thing. So another thing that I often tend to try to ask students to do is don't just think about each individual piece, but think about how things get connected. Think about how things get grouped, because then you can psychologically make suddenly 200 things feel more like 50 things. So the way you chunk, the way you group, the way you find patterns, connections, the connecting themselves, not only is it a valuable thing to do cognitively to bring that information into as connected knowledge in your head, but it can also make it feel like less. The other thing is I think it's a tip for teachers. A lot of students, unless they have some incentive to do it right now, they leave things out and leave things off. And so suddenly when final exams come around and they haven't been doing that practice, it is a lot to have to cover. Like there's a whole semester's worth of class that we taught, and there's a reason why we spread it over a semester. We did not want them to try to cram it in the last week. That is a case where there is too much material to cover in a very short amount of time. So as a professor, I try to make sure what are these incentives, what are these activities, what are these assignments I am putting into my structure to make sure that they have to keep up. We talked a little bit earlier about how do we get student buy-in. That's one of the things I talk about a lot. It's my goal for you as a teacher is that you are not going to be as stressed in midterm week, in finals week, when the high stakes exams come about. You're going to look at this class content and go, hey, actually, I got it. I've been doing this the whole time.
Um, One question to add that I have for you all, especially if you're more familiar with the research on this, a question I get from students often is when I have too much material to cover, where should I start, in a sense that do I cover the easiest stuff or do I start and focus on studying the hardest stuff? And I know there's research on it, but forgetting's normal, and so I can't retrieve it at the moment. So team, where should students start in terms of like what material to study at the beginning?
I know there's research on describing different strategies students use. So one is called discrepancy reduction model, which is I'm going to start at the thing that I'm the furthest away from. There's also region approximal learning. What is the next most achievable thing for me to get? The research, however, doesn't talk about what is better to do. It's more just describing different approaches that people have. And I suspect that different approaches will work better in different scenarios.
But what all that research has in common is it's under this umbrella of like agenda-based regulation. And agenda is basically a fancy word for a plan. So I would say having some kind of plan. So I encourage my students to habit stack. So like if you're always, eating dinner at a certain time, I'm going to spend 5 minutes, and I tell them it can be as short as 5 minutes doing some retrieval practice right after that. So it becomes a habit built into their day. Yeah, any way that you can do some studying. So as long as you have that plan, now you can deviate from the plan, life happens, but at least it's on your calendar and less likely to get eaten up by doom scrolling or whatever else they're doing.
And actually, we'll take a moment to do a little retrieval practice. If you want to try this out, embrace forgetting and learning and spacing. I know this is relevant to me and my students, but if you remember, if you would like to take a moment and type it in the chat, how many seats are in my school's auditorium? Because I mentioned that as an example of how I start my classes the very first day of the year. So you can type in the chat, how many seats are in my school's auditorium? And I have like lists and lists of trivia questions. Yeah, see, we've got some
Amazing.
folks who like knew it right away, some folks were guessing, some folks were confident, some folks were less confident. This is great. This is like learning in action that we can do and emphasize for our students. So I absolutely love this. If you would like the answer.
Is it the year the Magna Carta was signed?
It's 1,215. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Recently, I mean, like state capitals are great. I've come up with obscure trivia questions. I really like trivia questions that end in numbers or years, just because it works really well with that like drop mic call and response. So in what year, like one of them's like, in what year was Kazimierz Pulaski born? I'm born and raised in Illinois, and we have this very obscure state holiday about Kazimierz Pulaski. So I noticed someone here is from Illinois as well. And so like I like picking something personalized, but a year or a date or a number works really well. Okay, that was a side note. Can you share how retrieval practice supports executive functioning skills? Who would like to take this?
I don't think any of us are.
Okay. Reason's going on in my head. Executive functioning skills is really hard to define, and it can mean to some people it's like academic regulation. To some people, like me, I'm like it's everything. So that's why I think that's a little bit of what's going on, at least in my head when I think about that, and that's why it's a little hard to answer, and I don't have a good response.
I will say, I mean, one branch of executive functioning skills is working memory, which is basically what you're using when you're bringing information to mind from your long-term memory, which according to cognitive psychologists is anything over 30 seconds. So if you're retrieving something from a minute ago, then you're pulling it into your working memory. So in a way, retrieval practice is an executive function, right? It involves executive functions.
And related to that, I published a paper, and there are many others, but I can speak about my own research. I published a paper with my colleague, Dr. Jason Finley, on working memory and retrieval practice specifically. If you go to poojaagrawal.com/research, you can, I think it's 2017, where the gist is we showed that students with lower working memory capacity saw a bigger benefit from retrieval practice. And I think if you go to my website, retrievalpractice.org/neurodiversity, I've got links to information about retrieval practice with neurodiverse students, because that's obviously really important and ties into executive functioning and working memory. And retrieval practice improves long-term learning for students with learning disabilities, developmental language disorder, yeah, a wide range of research, and I'm glad that there's more and more of this kind of research at the intersection of retrieval practice, individual differences, executive functioning, and working memory.
I think that when people are thinking about executive functioning skills in an academic environment, I think what they're wondering a lot of the time is this rich get richer, poor get poorer kind of thing. So if I whip out some retrieval practice in my classroom, am I going to make this divide even bigger? And the short answer is no. Retrieval practice benefits everybody. And it's possible. And there's some people, there's a lot of research on kind of individual differences that have emerged in the past couple of years. And there is a little bit, like sometimes we see benefits for lower working memory, but we don't tend to see this we don't see this like, oh, the rich get richer thing. Retrieval practice works, and it works for everybody.
Yeah, so I can add to that. Something like summarization, it almost depends on the quality of the summary that people create. So that can lead to a rich gets richer effect. Retrieval practice tends to be one of those things where a lot of times students who are already doing really well might be spontaneously doing it. And so when you encourage and create structures to make sure everyone is doing it in your class, you're going to actually bring that bottom up and help everyone, but especially help the people who aren't spontaneously doing it on their own.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. I've been thinking of interleaving as a specific case of spaced practice, but I wanted to hear how the panel views these two concepts. If I may jump in with something that may help some people and may be really confusing, is to me, interleaving and spacing are like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Interleaving is spacing, but spacing doesn't have to be interleaved.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Dr. Yan, yeah, tell us more.
So you can really think about these two things as being like interleaving always has some amount of spacing in it, but interleaving offers a unique benefit when you intentionally put side by side things that students find confusable. Because when that happens, you are drawing attention to the critical distinctions between them. So there's that attentional component versus just strengthening memory. And then if you want to both interleave and space, that often can be the best. So the easiest way to both interleave and space is to have frequent cumulative practice quizzes, because you're going to be interleaving within each quiz, but then making sure you're also repeatedly coming back over days and weeks. And so that really would be a way of combining the two things. If you never come back to a topic, then you end up just doing interleaving within one session, one practice assignment, but not also getting this additional benefit of spacing across time.
And this reminds me of what comes up in K-12 and my own experiences about spiraling curriculum is, I mean, the basic idea of coming back to the concepts and reviewing them or tying them in over time, right? So spiraling kind of like a slinky, I guess is what it looks like in my head. I've also talked about how spiraling can be different from interleaving and spacing. Dr. Yan, can you share your thoughts?
My thoughts is just that the spirals don't come soon enough,
Ah,
right? They're
that's helpful.
oftentimes across years or across
Mm.
months. Spiral curriculum is very popular in med school, where in year one, they'll talk about this is the normal systems. And then year two, they'll say, like, here's where things go wrong, pathologies. But that is far too long in between. If we know that forgetting happens normally, and it happens, especially for newer information, it happens very quickly. Waiting a whole year and then just giving it one other boost is far too long to really get the benefits of space practice. So the big thing I think from this research is that this has to be built as a much more regular routine rather than relying on years-long curriculum spirals.
And this doesn't need to be an overhaul. I've worked with science teachers who, for example, were teaching chemistry, and they had learning the acids, ionic compounds, and molecular compounds. I think that's what it is. I'm not the chemist, but they had their worksheet set up like blocked, right? So all the ionic compounds, all the molecular compounds, all the acids, and I said, just mix it up, right? Really simple. Same thing with learning language, right? Do you need to learn the preterite tense, then the imperfect tense if you're learning Spanish or another language? Or can you just start immediately by mixing it up, or maybe give a brief introduction and then start with that mixing process that's going to incorporate that comparison process? Because as Dr. Yan mentioned, in real life, when you're using chemistry compounds or speaking a language, life is interleaved, right? So getting that practice early on with those concepts.
Thanks. Next up, so we have about 10 minutes left. I've read Powerful Teaching. Thank you for reading my book. And implemented many of these strategies. How does your book, Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning, differ? Thanks for asking. I swear we didn't plant this question, but it's a great question. So thank you for reading Powerful Teaching. I would say I love our book, Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning, for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, it's short. Like, I'm an educator. I have 85 students. I teach almost 200 students every school year. I don't have time to read books sometimes, you know. And so Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning is about a third of the length of Powerful Teaching. It's 10 chapters, 10 pages each. That's it. With bolded words, bullet pointed tips. And it's like visiting 10 classrooms around the world from teachers who are also the legit experts on the science of learning. So each chapter is really about how we teach and what our classrooms look like with the research to back it up. It's not technical at all. It's meant to be short and practical and snappy, and with the voices of 10 cognitive scientists. So I was the editor of Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning, but not the writer, because each chapter is from Dr. Yan, Dr. Blunt, Dr. Rivers, and 7 more authors. So you can find out more if you go to retrievalpractice.org/smartteaching. And you can go to retrievalpractice.org/books to learn more about my books, and also to learn more about other books on the science of learning that I recommend. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking we worked together on our chapter, and I wrote something and then I made it shorter, thinking of you guys and how busy you are. And then I read it again and I made it shorter. And then I gave it to Dr. Agarwal and we cut it in half. But so like what you get in that book is really like what we think this is my chapter is like a lot of bullet point, a little bit of justification. So that's kind of how that book was created with you guys in mind, and it's like a resource you can grab on the go easily, small bites.
Thanks. A few more. How can we use these concepts to support reading before the class, and both revisiting and extending in class, and balancing highly variable backgrounds? Wow. This is wrapping my head around this. Yeah. What stood out to me about this question is the highly variable backgrounds aspect. We all have experience where we have students who are like, pew, you know, they have so much prior knowledge. They already know about these topics. They're engaged. They're excited. I definitely have students who have already taken 3 psychology courses before they get to my class. I've had students who have never once heard of a single psychology concept and don't know what psychology is. You cannot mind read and you will not analyze people. And they think that's what psychology is, and it's not. And I also, 40% of my students are international students. 30% are English language learners. I have students who are on a wide spectrum of neurodiversity and being neurotypical. So we all have classes that are highly variable. So I just want to acknowledge that. And in terms of, from my perspective, how we can use these concepts, these strategies in balancing these backgrounds, it's always tough, right? It's hard to customize our classes and our lessons for every single student given those backgrounds. At the same time, one thing I love about retrieval practice is everyone can engage in it and everyone can benefit from it. And so even if I ask my students to retrieve, what's something you remember about research on sleep? Some of my students who already have a lot of expertise or really enjoyed learning about that unit might have a lot to say about what they remember about sleep. For some of my students who maybe don't have as high writing proficiency or were tired when we talked about sleep, they can still engage in retrieval, and everyone in the classroom can be writing or typing or adding something to Kahoot or to Slido without it feeling like, wow, someone else is really smart in the room and I'm not really smart. So I like that retrieval practice can be structured in simple ways, even with my classes that are extremely diverse.
I have also found I'm gonna think about that, like the reading before class piece. I have found that when students know they are going to be actively involved in the retrieval process, that they tend to up their pre-class game. So I go all in on retrieval in my neuroscience class. So you walk into class and you pick up your dry erase board marker and you head to the boards, and they're retrieving the entire class. And because it's low stakes, it's not like a threatening thing, but there is a little bit of social pressure there that they want to be able to participate in class. If they don't watch the videos beforehand, they're not going to get as much out of it. So the amount of buy-in that I get, like the pre-class work that's completed, is much higher when they know they're going to have to do something with it. If I assign a reading or a video before class, students come to class and then I summarize what their assignment was, their incentive for doing it is non-existent. But if they know they're going to have to, say, draw a neuron when they walk into class Monday morning at 8 a.m., they suddenly complete their classwork a lot more.
Thanks. So we're getting close to wrapping up the AMA. So we're going to go through these quickly. How important is it to tie retrieval practice to new concepts or skills? It's key.
Yeah.
Right? You want to practice new skills. If a medical student is learning CPR, they got to practice CPR. So to me, it's just like, yes, is my response to this. Yes.
And I'll just reiterate, which I think we already mentioned earlier, is you can retrieve even before you start a lesson. We call this pre-testing or pre-questioning. As long as you give corrective feedback later on, that's going to help make those connections. So yeah, early and often.
Thanks. Early and often. You mentioned not taking notes and normalizing forgetting during this AMA. How would you work with that in class? I'm switching to much more minimal slides. My students don't take notes. And if you look me up on Rate My Professor, this is a little divisive in my classes. Some of my students think they're not allowed to take notes. They totally can take notes. But I ask them throughout the semester, how does it feel to not take notes? Because I never have my students memorize anything. I will never ask them to define anything because I tell them I know the definition of those words. So you know what? I just want to know your thoughts about these concepts, not to memorize or define things. So they really don't have to take notes. My class sizes are 25 students and it's very discussion based. So I recognize that could be very different for different class sizes. And then when I ask them to retrieve anything you remember when we talked about neuroscience, or I can provide a hint, a retrieval cue, as Dr. Rivers mentioned, and I'll say, we watched literally 8 videos that were all 5 minutes or less on the brain. What's one of the videos that kind of stood out to you? And then a follow-up question I like to ask is, why was that memorable for you? Why was that a concept that you can retrieve? Tell me about that process. Because if students didn't write notes, then they didn't study it, They definitely didn't cram it. But then why is that one video what stood out to you? And that actually provides really good feedback for me. I'm like, oh, that video, the dogs and fMRI machines, look this up on YouTube, really resonates with my students. And so I know like which videos to use and which videos to leave out or to swap out. So they get used to it. I talk about my forgetting all the time. We constantly normalize it. They're not graded on their forgetting or penalized for their forgetting. So a lot of it's just asking them their thoughts, their examples from their own lives, because they're not going to forget examples from their own lives. You know what I mean? They don't have to memorize examples from their own lives. So that's kind of how I normalize and get at forgetting without taking notes. And my students do have access to my slides. I forgot to mention that. We use Canvas, and so students can access all my Google Slides, but they are also minimal. So if a student's like, wow, I missed class, why is there a picture of a fire extinguisher? That's a good opportunity for them to come to my drop-in hours and we can talk about fire extinguishers. Okay. And how do you handle the variable processing time in class now that I've been asked to stop the weekly low stakes pre-class retrieval and be more traditional?
Don't.
So is this like a curriculum or like school administrators coming in and saying, hey, like we have a specific pacing, we have a specific thing that we want every teacher to do? I'm guessing that's the type of scenario there.
The variable processing thing.
The variable processing makes me think about when I was getting certified in elementary ed, we talked a lot about differentiation. I don't know if this is still a thing in K-12 teacher training. Okay, thanks, Shelley. I see Shelley nodding. Hi, Shelley. Shelley and I have known each other for years. Differentiation is like, going back to kind of the variable backgrounds of students. Students are going to take different amounts of time to retrieve. And so one thing I do, even without weekly low stakes pre-class retrieval in class, if I have students write down 2 things they remember from the unit about social psychology, and I see some students are done, then I'll walk around, or I'll just say, if you're still retrieving or writing down 2 things, great. If you've written down 2 things, write down a third thing. And then everyone's writing again. So you're not aware of who is waiting for someone else and how much longer do we have, and oh my gosh, Shelley's taking so long, right? It just gives students something added. Like if you already did 2, great, do a third one. This isn't a race. So that's just like my very simple tip is like if retrieval, or a brain dump. Oh, if you're done with the brain dump, keep trying. Just spend an extra minute. You don't have to sit around and look at the class.
I have found that in my neuroscience class, when you get people who are retrieving quickly because they've done retrieval on their own before class, they often then default to helping those who are struggling by giving them cues, not the answers, but cueing them. And then they're getting that reciprocal teaching, elaborative explanation going on. So they're getting this extra boost. If that's what the question is getting at.
Yeah. So let's do some retrieval for ourselves. I'm going to put up some just like tips to help support our work in science communication, getting the word out there about the science of learning. In the meantime, type in the chat, what's a key takeaway for you? Let's retrieve for you. What is a key takeaway from this Ask Me Anything? And feel free to add a little more context. Why is that memorable for you? Why do you want to remember that? I also talk about a flash forward. I ask my students, what's something you want to remember 5 years from now or 10 years from now? So we'll take a moment, type it in the chat, your key takeaway from today.
Not to forget.
Yes. The world comes at you in or leave. Thanks,
Such
Dr.
a good
Yan.
quote, Dr.
Forgetting and reviewing facilitates learning. Retrieval practice is beneficial for low working memory learners. Thanks. Keep typing these in. We love these because it's also a great aspect of retrieval practices. Formative assessment, summative assessment. Part of that formative aspect is knowing what stood out to students, what stood out to all of you, that maybe we can emphasize more, highlight more, maybe we haven't written about, but it's like, whoa, that tip really stood out. So we need to make sure to communicate that in all of our writing or social media. Yeah, so keep typing those in. Thanks. In the meantime, here are the books that were mentioned. My first book, Powerful Teaching, and the QR code. The book that we have collectively written, Smart Teaching, Stronger Learning, that I hope you will also check out. I feel really strongly and really proud about these books because as educators, the more we can rely on evidence-based, research-based tips to teach, so we're not reinventing the wheel, and then our students are forgetting everything. And then we're like, oh my gosh, I just talked about that. Now I have to reteach it. Or students get stressed about studying. These are great ways to learn tips about how to adapt the science of learning for your classroom. Some more resources on my website, retrievalpractice.org/download. I have more than 100 free resources on my website, PDFs, Google Slides, professional development materials. I've got that list of additional recommended books on the science of learning and study tips for students at retrievalpractice.org/students. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Paulina. Powerful Teaching might be the most important book I've read in my teaching career. Thank you. And there are lots of great reads. Of course, I'm always reading about teaching as well, but I love the short books. So feel free to share your recommended books as well. And some other key takeaways is we all forget retrieval is focused on low stakes, effortful learning. As Dr. Blunt said, anything you do from memory is retrieval practice. Students today don't have less capacity, they're just more distractions, as Dr. Yan said. So that is almost pretty much our time for this AMA. Thank you so much all for joining us from literally around the world. Give yourselves a hand for taking the time to be here and join us and learn and share your thoughts. It means the world to us. So thank you so much. And have a good morning, afternoon, evening, good night. Bye. Take care.